Super Mario Odyssey is one heck of a game. It's by far the biggest 3D Mario game yet and therefore has the most content out of all of them. The game has a total of 880 power moons, which if I'm being honest is way too much, but hey, it's fine and not what this video is about. In Mario Odyssey, you go through a journey of collecting different moons and outfits, learning new movement tricks, and most importantly, visit a lot of so-called kingdoms, which are the same as, for example, the galaxies in Super Mario Galaxy. There are a total of 17 kingdoms to explore in the game, some that are pretty big like Sand or Wooded, some that are pretty small like Cascade or Lost, and some that are just boss arenas or side quests like Cloud or the Dark and Darkest Side. In this video, I'm going to give my opinion on every one of these kingdoms, explain why I think one kingdom is better than the other, and see what my favorite and least favorite kingdoms are in the game. This is gonna be a pretty long video, so get ready and buckle up. Also, some popcorn or chips would be a pretty good idea. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Most of the 2D and 3D Mario games start off in a grass or sky-themed world, except for Mario Sunshine and Mario Galaxy, which starts off in, well, space obviously. Super Mario Odyssey is also one of the very few Mario games that does not follow that trend. Instead, you start off in the Cap Kingdom, which is more of a haunted or mysteriously themed area. Cap Kingdom has two main areas, the Plaza and the Top Hat Tower. The plaza looks nothing really special. You have a few hat-shaped ships here and there, some items and secrets, and that's pretty much it. It's a pretty empty area if you don't count all the decorational stuff, of course. The Top Hat Tower is the highlight of this kingdom, being a tall tower shaped like a top hat, obviously. Inside the tower you can find a small parkour where you capture your first creature, the frog, which is in my opinion one of the best captures and probably the easiest one to start off this game with. But most importantly, you meet Cappy here. Cappy is going to be the most crucial asset in your entire run of the game, which is pretty self-explanatory. That said though, the Cap Kingdom is just a pretty empty and boring place. Even if you come back after beating Bowser, it never gets more exciting than doing some simple platforming or just looking for very obvious moons. I still like this kingdom since it has such an interesting theme for a starting area, but it is pretty boring when compared to some other kingdoms on this list. Next, let's talk about the Cascade Kingdom. This is where the adventure really begins. The Cap Kingdom was a decent introduction to give yourself some time to get familiar with the controls, but the Cascade Kingdom is the real deal. Sure, the theme is not as interesting since it's literally a grass-themed world, but the power moons are more interesting and it actually has a proper boss fight even though it could have been a bit less dull. Probably the best part of this kingdom is this. Yeah, that's right, you can be a freaking T-Rex in this game. As a T-Rex, you can pretty much destroy anything in your path, and it's super satisfying to do. Even though he can barely be used for any power moon in the kingdom, there is one bonus area dedicated to the T-Rex in which you have to kill certain enemies or break open a giant rock. Even though this bonus area is pretty simple, any gameplay with a T-Rex is always appreciated. Now let's talk about the flaws of this kingdom. First of all, the kingdom is really small. Not as small as the Cap Kingdom, although it doesn't really look like a big difference after going through the entirety of it. And after coming back to the kingdom, you have this boss arena which is completely empty apart from a single scarecrow challenge. There could have been so much stuff here while there is almost nothing. Secondly, the theme of this kingdom is, besides an overall theme, kind of historical, which sounds really interesting. But what does this kingdom do with that theme? Apart from the T-Rex and this moon from the monitor, literally nothing besides decorational stuff. For the rest, this kingdom is pretty good. It's one of the most memorable ones out of the game and is a pretty good area to really start off the game with. Now we're at the Sand Kingdom, and let me just get my opinion out of the way. This is my favorite kingdom from the game, And that might have sounded sarcastic, but I'm serious, this is my favorite kingdom for Mario Odyssey. It's by far the biggest kingdom in the game, and it might be too big for some people, but I think that it fits perfectly with the whole desert theme of the kingdom. It makes sense that it's so big. While there's a lot of space that is pretty much empty, again I think it fits perfectly with the theme, and there's still more than enough to do so it doesn't become plain and boring. Sure, this one moon where you have to bring this Goomba all the way to the edge here to this Lady Goomba is pretty annoying, but that's only one single moon out of many. Most of this kingdom is a joy. You have the Tostarena town, the ruins, the inverted pyramid, the Moai habitat, and much more to explore. And I didn't even mention all of the areas. You'll be surprised at how many things there are to do in this kingdom. The main capture in this kingdom, being the Bullet Bill, is one of the best in the entire game. Not only is it really fun to use, but it's also really easy to control. In fact, this capture was so good to Nintendo that they built an entire boss around it, but instead of using regular Bullet Bills, you have Knuckle-Attack's Fist instead, which controls in exactly the same way. This is by far the best boss in the entire game, and my god, there are so many bonus areas in this kingdom. You have the Ice Cave, the Invisible Maze, the Bullet Bill Maze, the Strange Neighborhood, and so on and forth. There is one negative thing about this kingdom which comes to my mind at this moment. There might be almost 100 power moves to collect in this kingdom, but that also makes it pretty hard to remember a lot of them. However, this is more of a thing to blame on the structure of the whole game rather than the structure of one single kingdom, since a lot of the kingdoms have this problem where they have a lot of power moons, but not a lot of them are as memorable as they should be. So in short, the Sand Kingdom is one of the most memorable kingdoms in the entire game and is definitely my favorite one. Now we've come across the first split path in the game with a choice between the Lake Kingdom and the Wooded Kingdom. Let's first talk about the Wooded Kingdom. To be honest, I kind of have mixed feelings about this kingdom. Sometimes I really like this kingdom, but sometimes I also kind of hate it. Let's first begin with the positive things. First of all, the kingdom is pretty memorable and a lot of the power moves are pretty fun to do. The story and the main objectives are a great way to get introduced to the confusing but intriguing layout of this kingdom, which is also a negative point about this kingdom, but we'll get to that in a second. Secondly, the theme of this kingdom is one of my favorites. At first, it just looks like your regular forest level, but then you see a lot of robots and a whole mechanical theme around it, which I never would have expected from a forest stage. However, now let's talk about the negative things. Like I said a few seconds ago, the layout of this kingdom is pretty confusing and you might like it that way, but I think that it is not really that friendly for those who play the game for the first time, or even for people who played the game multiple times and don't really remember a lot of it. My point is that such a confusing layout might seem cool at first, but trust me when I say that you will find it very annoying after a while. Then you have the Deep Woods, and I truly don't know why Nintendo added this. The entire area is this small side area which you enter by falling down the main area. The problem here is that it is very annoying to get back up when you do accidentally fall down into this area. You have to find a nut which you have to plant in a pot, and then a vine grows out, giving you a way to get back to the main area. The issue with this is that there's only 4 points in the entire area that have this sort of nut. So it can either take a few seconds to find a nut or a few minutes, because secondly, there is no map in this area. And I get it, it's supposed to be an isolated area, but it just makes it so annoying to keep track of your position. My final problem with the kingdom is that there are too many power moons involving doing tedious tasks. Two of the worst examples of this being this taking notes moon on top of this wall, and yeah, you probably know which other one I'm talking about. So while the Wooded Kingdom is definitely pretty memorable, there's also a lot of tedious things to do which isn't really in the kingdom's benefit. Still, it's a pretty fun kingdom when you don't look at those moons and only go for the good ones. Next up is the Lake Kingdom. Guessing from the name, you can probably expect it to be a water-themed area, and you're correct. And while this is definitely not my favorite kingdom, I don't think it's bad either. In fact, I actually enjoy it more than the Wooded Kingdom simply because of the fact that it is not as overly big and not as tedious even though it's an underwater stage. What makes it so much less tedious is the fact that you can capture a Cheep Cheep and swim much faster. Most of the time he isn't really necessary, but there are some moons for which it is quite handy to possess a Cheep Cheep, like this one really deep down as well. Unlike in the Sand Kingdom, there aren't really many bonus areas here, but I do find that I have a lot of fun doing them. Well, maybe except for this one with the poison waves, but oh well. And holy crap, this kingdom is so gorgeous. The colors are really vibrant and all of the walls are modeled like a dress, which is fascinating. And then you have the zippers, which are purely amazing. They're not used that much, but just the fact that you can be a zipper is blowing my mind. The negatives that I can think of right now are that the stage is pretty small and that the boss is not really spectacular, but nonetheless this kingdom is still enjoyable and is one of my favorite ones. So I decided to group two kingdoms together since they're so similar, the Cloud Kingdom and the Ruined Kingdom. While I definitely think Cloud is the better one since it has a more important boss fight and it's not as disappointing as Ruined, doesn't say I think Cloud is that great either. Let's start off with the Ruined Kingdom. While this kingdom definitely has a really cool boss, the actual fight itself is pretty disappointing. In every single phase, it first is basically a game of jump roping, and then you only have to go to him, climb on top of him, take the swords out of his nose, and then ground pound his weak spot, and that is all. And you have to do it 3 times. The first time you do this, it might be pretty fun, but then it quickly becomes very repetitive. The entire fight is just pretty disappointing, and that is pretty much exactly the same for the kingdom itself. When you enter this kingdom at first, it looks extremely cool, but then you realize it only has the disappointing boss fight and just a handful of moons, and all of the magic fades away. Also, fuck this moon, like, I swear. Then you have the Cloud Kingdom, which in my opinion is a little bit better, but still not great. This kingdom has a battle with Bowser and a few power moons here and there, and again, that's it. The reason I like this kingdom more than the Ruined Kingdom though is because it's not as disappointing. So yeah, these two kingdoms are not really my favorite ones, and I think everyone can agree with me on this. Now we're at the kingdom I'm probably the most excited to talk about in this video, the Lost Kingdom. And that's not because it's my favorite kingdom, which I already pointed out is the Sand Kingdom, but because it's the most underrated kingdom out of the entire game. And I don't really see any reasoning behind that. Yes, the Lost Kingdom doesn't have any story or boss fight, and it's one of the smallest kingdoms in the game, but did it really need a boss fight? I personally think that if there was a boss fight in this kingdom, then pretty much the entire feeling of this being a lost kingdom would have been ruined. And this is actually more than an objective thing rather than a subjective thing. And not only because I like the kingdom and you should too, but because it just doesn't make sense. Why would there be a boss fight in a kingdom which is literally forgotten by Bowser himself? Sure, he probably planned something out that if he would have shot you in his cutscene, then you would land in Lost Kingdom, but why would he spend extra effort on interrupting you with a boss fight in his kingdom while he's already so far ahead? Anyway, enough talking about the actual story, or well, not story. Let's just actually talk about the content in the kingdom itself. The kingdom is laid out in such a way that it becomes an open world and linear area at the same time. The area up until the first checkpoint is pretty much all open world, but there also is a clear linear path in it as well. Then from this checkpoint on, you have 2 linear paths, one to get to the top of the summit and one to the right, which again splits up in 2 different paths, one into this fuzzy section and one into the swamp section with all the tree stumps in the poison. And that's pretty much the entire kingdom. Like I said, it's small but definitely enjoyable. And I know you might think it's boring as hell or it's annoying because of the poison, but really, come on. Just play through the kingdom one more time after watching this video, and hopefully you will agree with me more than before. The last thing I want to talk about is just how beautiful the scenery is in this kingdom. It's all in a sort of cartoony, or I don't even know how to describe it. It just looks extraordinary, and I have never seen anything like this in any Mario game before. It looks like everything is made out of this sort of concrete or stone-like material, and it looks very cool. So while probably a lot of people disagree with me on this, I definitely enjoy this kingdom quite a lot and is one of my favorite kingdoms in this whole game. The game so far has done a pretty good job of keeping the main story and objectives of the kingdoms interesting and well designed. Even for the Lost Kingdom, which has no story but only the objective of getting 10 power moons. This is made interesting by the intriguing layout and the unique capture of the kingdom. However, it's pretty disappointing to say that the same cannot be said for the Metro Kingdom. Now, hold on before smashing that dislike and leaving the video, just let me explain why I think this is. So, in the previous kingdoms, besides Cloud and Ruined Later, you had stories or objectives which really go through the effort of making you want to keep playing in the kingdom, possibly explore every nook and cranny of the area. The Metro Kingdom, on the other hand, makes it incredibly obvious that you need to go as fast as possible to save the city from this scary insect creature, or else the city will be cursed forever, or something in the lines of that. It does the exact opposite of what most kingdoms before did, which is to give you enough objectives before you actually need to fight a boss. For example, in the Sand Kingdom, you need to go to the ruins first, climb up this tower, find some moon shards, go to the inverted pyramid, parkour through it, before you then finally reach the first boss of the kingdom. And I didn't even mention all of it. The Wooded Kingdom kind of does the same thing, but then with different enemies, captures, and paths down the road. The Metro Kingdom, however, only has 3 things to do in the first objective. Do this parkour outdoors, then this one indoors in the New Donk City Hall interior, and then already fight the boss, with 2 of the 3 things being pretty much exactly the same. The game doesn't give you any time to adjust to the theme of the kingdom. It just throws you right into it, expecting you to do it the right way as fast as you can. After you defeat the boss, the second mission gets initialized. What do you have to do here? Simple. Go to the New Donk City Hall Plaza, talk to Pauline, then she tells you to find her 4 musicians for her festival, and then it literally becomes a game of hide and seek in a Mario game, for God's sake. But no, you don't have to go find something just once. No, you have to do the same thing 4 times for 4 different musicians. And to make it even worse, after you find a musician and get the moon, which is ridiculous for just finding something, by the way, the game sends you back inside the same building every single time. This just makes finding the rest of the band so much more boring than it needed to be. But Bjorn, you still have to go through the festival. Well, I'm glad you told me, because that means even more complaining. So, the festival. The song is okay and the graphics are pretty good, but that is pretty much all that's positive about it. The festival is literally just an 8-bit linear level where you have to avoid some enemies and obstacles as usual. There is nothing special about the level. It could fit right into every single other kingdom. It just wouldn't have been called a festival, which it can already barely be called because the execution is so poorly done. My final complaint for now, but trust me, isn't actually my final complaint, is just how overly small the kingdom is. The kingdom is called New Donk City, and yet I feel like New York City is at least 100 or maybe even a few 100 times bigger than this. When compared to kingdoms like Cascade or Lost, you can barely tell the difference scale-wise because it feels almost identical on the ground. Heck, the game even claims the size of the city to be redonkulous, even though it's not even close. Okay, enough complaining about the kingdom. Let me just briefly talk about some of the positive stuff. I do like how some of the moons, like this recreation of Mario Bros. In theater or the Ashikaris challenge, are pretty memorable, even though the latter is pretty terrible. But it might just be memorable because of how my own brain tells it to be. So while I don't think this kingdom is terrible, it definitely is very overrated, and I really wonder why people love it so much. And now we're at the coolest kingdom of all, the Snow Kingdom. Pun completely intended. Let's get most of the negative stuff out of the way first. The most obvious being the races. I don't like the races. The first one is fine considering you get a multi-moon for it, but every single other race after that is literally just a copy-paste, with some of them being more difficult and 2 of them being in a different course. Nothing unique at all. The last negative thing is that the kingdom is absolutely tiny. The only 2 areas are the outside and the town. That is it. However, this kingdom is somehow really nostalgic to me. The most obvious reason I can think of right now is that the atmosphere is absolutely stunning. This kingdom is definitely not the most beautiful out of all of them, but I just love that there are those tiny icicle sound effects in the background and that there is a gigantic wall around the entire area. Plus, the Ice Cave soundtrack is the best music in the whole game, like come on. Finally, you have the Typhoon capture, which is not the best one, but it's also not a bad capture. The only thing that is kind of annoying is that he flies pretty slow, but it's okay. The Snow Kingdom definitely is small, but I still like it quite a bit. And I actually think it's better than Metro, but that's just my opinion. Overall, a pretty chill kingdom. If you thought the Lake Kingdom was not enough for you, then the Seaside Kingdom is most definitely. Seaside takes place at a beautiful beach area, and it's probably the most relaxing area in the whole game, besides the Mushroom Kingdom, which we'll get to later on. There is one main objective in the Seaside Kingdom, which is that you have to beat this boss called Mollusk Lanceur. But before you do that, you have to find 4 switches to break open cages and shoot the corks out of these fountains. All the 4 switches are pretty easy to get to, but most of them are pretty fun to complete. The main capture in this kingdom, being the Gushion, is phenomenal and is in my opinion the best capture in the whole game. Not only does it have the most interesting moveset, but it's just really fun to spray water around and hit enemies or clear out this lava very fast with it. And I think Nintendo definitely agrees with me on this, because otherwise they wouldn't have let you use the Gushion in the boss fight itself. After you defeat the boss, you get this beautiful view of a sunset before you, and my god, I can just look at this for ages. And the music fits perfectly with the scenario. Again, the Lake Kingdom was great, but the Seaside Kingdom manages to pull the water theme off almost perfectly. There are almost no boring parts in this kingdom, even though there are pretty many power moves in it which are pretty repetitive. One thing which I absolutely hate about this kingdom though is the volleyball challenge. The easier moon is fine, but the harder moon can take ages, because if you make one tiny slip up, you have to start all over again. In fact, it is so tedious that I haven't even gotten this moon in any of my playthroughs yet. So the Seaside Kingdom is such a pleasing kingdom and very beautiful, and I think it's definitely worthy of your time. Remember Sweet Sweet Galaxy from Galaxy 1? Or Sweet Mystery from Galaxy 2? Maybe you even remember Cakewalk Flip from Mario 3D World. Well, the great successor to all those levels is the Luncheon Kingdom. Guessing from the name, you probably think it's gonna be a food-themed area, and it's no surprise that it actually is. Luncheon is filled to the brim with fruits and vegetables. There is also one big pot of stew in the plaza, and most importantly, a giant pot at the top of the volcano, which is pretty much what the whole story is about. One thing that catches my eye about this kingdom though is how interesting it looks. The entire kingdom has this cel-shaded look and everything is pretty low poly. However, not as low poly that it starts to look absolutely terrible like Mario 64. Another thing I like is that pretty much the entire kingdom is covered in this pink goo stuff. Like, what is this stuff even supposed to be? I don't know. One thing that I don't really find that interesting though is the lava bubble capture. The only things you can do as a lava bubble is move and jump. And also light torches, which doesn't really come in handy since that barely ever has to be done. Another thing I do like here is some of the bonus areas, like this one where you have to platform across spinning platforms without having your hat, or this one where you have to use the lava bubble to cross a very thin path of this pink goo stuff. So yeah, this kingdom is a pretty fun one, and I'm having a pretty fun time going through it. One kingdom I'm having barely any fun in though is the Bowser's Kingdom. The entire kingdom is this Japanese themed linear gauntlet of short sections where you have to complete certain tasks, like kill a certain enemy or collect some moon shards. This kingdom is to me the most unmemorable kingdom in the entire game. I've played through this game at least 6 or 7 times now, and I can barely remember 3 or 4 power moves from this kingdom aside from the story. Sure, the unique capture in this kingdom, the Pokio, is okay, but it's literally just a walking version of the fork capture we've seen in the Luncheon Kingdom before. The kingdom is made up of a few of these large platforms on which you can find a couple of power moons. Some of them have the objectives I just mentioned, but on most of them you literally only have to get to the end. No unique challenge, no gimmick at all, just platform until the next spark pylon basically every single time. And then you have this random floating grass island which has nothing to do with the kingdom apart from how it looks. It's just there so Nintendo can throw some extra bullshit moons in this kingdom as if there weren't already enough of those here already. The architecture of this kingdom looks very plain and everything looks exactly the same throughout the entire kingdom. It's also very annoying since you can bump into walls or ledges of the building so easily that if you keep doing it over and over, you just want to pull your hair out of your skull. I also feel like the Pokio is barely utilized here. The moveset this capture provides is pretty good since you have quite a lot of options, but the problem is that this kingdom barely does anything with them, which is so disappointing to see for a capture that could have had so much more potential in the level design. Then you have these staircase creatures, better known as staircase ogres, and if the name sounds boring to you, then I don't blame you at all because the enemy itself is also really uninteresting, at least after you see what it can do. At first it looks really intimidating to see such a big creature with an interesting graphical design, however the only thing it does is slam his staircase onto the ground in the attempt to squish you. That's literally the only thing this guy does. The game makes it extremely easy to climb on top of him since it takes a very long time for him to raise the staircase again. My final complaint for now is just the sheer number of tedious and annoying moons there are in this kingdom. One of the greatest examples of this being the Koopa freerunning races. The race is literally taking place across the entire kingdom and it's just a pain to do this thing for just 2 moons when you can easily find more than 2 moons in just one small corner of the kingdom. Even one of the objectives is literally just a tiny boss rush, which is more lame than anything else. So to conclude my point, I just think this kingdom is nothing but a waste of time and is not fun going through it at all. The next kingdom, however, is certainly very fun, especially to me, the Moon Kingdom. After the huge disappointment of the last kingdom, I was extremely satisfied to finally see a reference to Mario Galaxy. The purple coins here are shaped like star bits, and that's it? Really? Is this literally the only reference to Mario Galaxy in this whole game? Do you fucking know why that pisses me off so much? Because Mario 64 literally gets an entire kingdom. Even Mario Sunshine gets more, being an outfit. Meanwhile, Mario Galaxy literally only gets one reference, being just a stupid coin. I won't ever forgive you for this, Nintendo. Anyway, the Moon Kingdom. This kingdom is pretty small compared to most other kingdoms we've had so far, but that doesn't mean it's bad at all. You have the low gravity, the beautiful view of planet Earth, an entire lava section in the moon's underground, and most importantly, the final fight against Bowser. Let's start with the underground moon caverns. Boy, this area is intense. We haven't really seen any lava themed level before, so this area was more than welcome. In this area, you have multiple captures from various kingdoms that return in a pretty long marathon. You have the Parabones, Sherms, Hammerbos, Tropical Wigglers, Bounce-Eye Bills, Bullet Bills, Moai, and the Charging Chuck. That's a total of 8 captures in just one section of a kingdom. Why we haven't seen anything like it before is beyond me. And then at the end you have a rematch with Madame Brood, which is still pretty lame, but at least it's a bit better than the fight in the Cascade Kingdom. Then you have the boss fight with Bowser himself, and man, this boss fight is pretty darn good. The first part is probably the least interesting. It's just the fight from Cloud Kingdom, but it's a bit harder and now he breathes fire in between the phases. After you give Bowser the final punch, you have beaten the game. Or have you? At first it might look like it, but when you walk up to Peach, the entire place starts to fall apart and you land in a different area where you find out you can freaking capture Bowser himself. The difficulty here starts to ramp up quite a bit. There are a lot of dangerous places where you can get hit by the falling moon pieces or fall off the level. Overall, this boss battle is one of the coolest out of all the Mario games. And of course, let's not forget about the main area, which has tons of power moons and secrets to get. My favorite moon, or rather moons in this kingdom, have to be these 2 in this 2D galaxy themed area where there are these moving planets with varying gravity. It just feels so satisfying to clear a huge gap with a giant leap, and it's also really fun to do. So this kingdom is one of the highlights in the game for me, not only because it's in space, but simply because the experience from start to end is very enjoyable and really memorable. I just quickly want to get rid of the dark and darker side of the moon. I personally think that darker is better because it's actually a unique level instead of pure recycled crap content or a lame boss rush. Even though I think the darker side is much more challenging since it isn't really as boring or lame as going through the exact same bonus areas again, doesn't mean darker is that great. So yeah, these two kingdoms are definitely not very fun and especially not very great. Finally, let's take a look at the Mushroom Kingdom, the most relaxing and peaceful area in the entire game. This kingdom is so beautiful, which is ironic considering it's a reference to Mario 64. Peach's castle is probably the highlight of this kingdom for a lot of people, but I think it's pretty underwhelming. There's not a lot of stuff to do or see inside, or even around the castle itself. One of my favorite things about this kingdom is on top of the castle, and you can probably already guess what it is. Yoshi! Yeah, that's right, Yoshi's in the game, although you don't ride on his back, but more or less just capture him. He has a couple of interesting moves, like the flutter jump or wall jump, but he is pretty much only used to eat apples for some moons and that's it. One of my complaints about this kingdom is purely how many crappy moves there are. The boss rematches are probably the best ones out of them, but still not that great. But then you have stuff like the seed planting moons, the bunny catching moon, this moon where you have to grow some flowers, the sheep hunting moons, the moons where you have to eat fruit as Yoshi, the hide and seek moon. I could go on for much longer. Heck, they literally give you a moon for turning into ugly Mario. Like, seriously? But then the achievements you get from Toadette. Why the fuck did they add those in the game? They have literally no point at being in the game at all. But how many of these are there, you might be wondering? There are 61 moons you get this way. And the worst part is that they have to give you the got a moon cutscene every single time, and that is exactly as tedious as it sounds. Another complaint is just how many references there are to Mario 64, and if you're new to my channel, you might be thinking, why? But it's because, well, I hate Mario 64. You have Peach's castle, the fact that the moons are now stars, the jingle every time you get a star, the purple coins, and by far the most stupid of all, which is the freaking Mario 64 suit. You literally have to spend 35 purple coins just to turn into ugly Mario. Why? And yes, I know you get 2 moons for it, but why didn't Nintendo upgrade this freaking era to look at least a tiny bit good? It just fucking blows my mind how stupid and unfair this game is to other 3D Mario games. Okay, but anyway, now that we've talked about every single kingdom, here is my ranking of every one of them. 17 Dark Side, 16 Ruined, 15 Darker Side, 14 Cloud, 13 Bowser's, 12 Cap, 11 Mushroom, 10 Metro, 9 Wooded, 8 Cascade, 7 Snow, 6 Luncheon, 5 Lakes, 4 Seaside, 3 Lost, 2 Moon, and 1 is the Sand Kingdom. Okay, so I know this video is pretty long and I mentioned some very serious positive and negative things about this game, but don't worry, I still enjoy Mario Odyssey a lot. It's one of my favorite Mario games of all time, and I think Nintendo did an excellent job at this game, even though I still think Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 are better. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please leave a like and share this one with everyone you know, because it took a freaking long time to put this together. Thank you so much for watching again. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to my channel for more content, and I hope to see you in the next video. Goodbye.